Hi, my name's Lou, welcome to my channel. In this week's video I'm going to be doing some drawing. Now I'm an artist and I mainly do printmaking, but the printmaking I do is fairly abstract and a lot of it is about repetitive patterns, making them quite obsessive. And so in order to do that I do a lot of sketching where I generate patterns. And I think this is a really good exercise if you've got a kind of creative block. If you don't know what to draw, you don't have to worry about a subject because there isn't one. It's really about kind of creating simple shapes and repeating them over and over again. So I keep sketchbooks with lots of these different ideas in, and some of them make it into prints and some of them don't, and some of them, sometimes the ideas that I come out with to start with are not all that refined, but over the course of several weeks I can work with those patterns and work with the ideas and refine them and make them more sophisticated and something that I could put into a print at the end of the day. So I'm going to talk you through my process and I'm going to let you watch along with me as I create one of these drawings. So here we go. So let's turn to a new page in my sketchbook and let's start. And at this point I have no idea what I'm going to draw, but I want to kind of limit the amount of page that I'm working with. And I want to kind of give my final drawing a bit of breathing room on the page. So I decide to find the centre of the page with a ruler and a pencil, and then from that centre point draw a circle. Now I'm using a pair of compasses here, but you could just as easily draw around a plate or something. It's entirely up to you, and if you want to freehand a circle, that's perfectly fine too. In fact, there are no rules really, it's up to you, whatever you decide. So now I've got my shape and I just know that I'm going to create some designs to fill it. So I've got a few pens here and I like these uni-pin fineliners, but really honestly anything that you have to hand will work. You could do this in pencil or a biro or something like that. I've got a few different sizes of nibs here, and I'm going to start drawing with a kind of a medium-sized one, so it's not very fine and it's not very thick. And I just start putting pen to paper and see what happens. So I start by drawing some circles. It's a nice simple shape, and there are lots of different ways of drawing circles. I started by drawing some that were slightly different sizes, so I'm just varying the size a little bit, and I'm leaving roughly the same amount of room between each circle. You get a very different effect if you drew circles all the same size. You get a very different effect if you drew them in like a grid pattern, and you get a different effect if you let the circles touch as well. So there's all sorts of different options. Having drawn a little kind of patch of circles, I decide they need some kind of something else. So I start to join them with a series of straight lines. I almost immediately regret doing this because I think it's going to look very quite like static and it could be quite rigid. I'm wondering at this point about, I'm kind of creating little enclosures. Maybe I'll colour some of them in different colours. But I am just going to trust myself and stick with it and see where it goes. So I'm just going to start doing a few more circles, and then I think this needs some movement, it needs some kind of dynamism, so I'm going to extend some of those straight lines and do them in a little fan shape, and then let's put some little circles on the end of them, because why not? And then having made one little fan shape of straight lines, I obviously need to then do it again a couple more times just to see how it's going to look really. So again, draw some more straight lines, put some circles on the end of it, and then I just keep going with that. Now I'll do a little bit of the drawing and then decide whether it needs anything else. I usually use 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes 5 if I'm feeling very brave. Different kind of simple shapes, and just put them together in this way and see how they go. see how it looks, and then I judge the drawing as I'm going along and see, do I think it needs something else? Do I think it needs something of a different scale, or am I quite happy with it all being the same kind of scale? You can choose any kind of different shapes for this. Some really simple ones to think about using are triangles, which are great. You can join them all together and create like a network shape. You can make them really regular. You can use squares as well, rectangles. You can use like teardrop shapes and leaf shapes, all sorts of things like that. And then you can make them short and fat, or you can make them long and thin. There's all sorts of different options. And at this point, you can decide whether you want like curved lines or straight lines in your shapes. You'll get a different effect with each type. And what I generally do is, if I've done a drawing like this, then I will then think, oh, I wonder what it would look like if I'd used more curving flowing lines instead of straight ones. What would have happened if the fan shape sections had been much bigger scale than the circles? What would it have looked like if the circles were closer together and maybe I'd filled in the space in between them? And so I might do a few different variations on the same pattern. But for this one, having done a little bit, a few circles, join them together, a few little fan shapes, another little patch of circles, I decided I quite like the way it's looking, and so I'm just going to continue with that pattern and fill the whole circle. As I'm developing this drawing, I'm keeping in mind the overall kind of flow of the shape. I really want my kind of fan shapes to be going in slightly different directions, but generally kind of to be going out from the centre. And I want to keep a really good balance of the kind of the fan shapes and the little areas of circles. And then I'm being really careful to make sure that any little gaps I fill with little circles, and make sure that the drawing overall doesn't have any kind of big areas of white space in it. Of course, if you want some areas of white space in it, that's absolutely fine. But for this one, I really wanted everything to be quite close and kind of equidistant. I think that's a look I quite like in lots of drawings. And so it's quite easy with circles, because if I'm drawing them at different sizes, any little area that's got a gap, I can put a circle or two in and fill it in. So I'm quite liking the way that this is developing, and I'm just going to keep going and fill in the whole of my big circle. But as I'm doing the last little bits, I'm sort of keeping in mind what I might want to do next, because even though this is quite pleasing, and having everything the same kind of weight, because I've used the same pen for it all, and kept everything kind of the same scale and kind of the same distance apart, means that the overall effect is a little flat. And so as I finish the last little bits, I'm already thinking about how I'm going to change that when I come to do the next step. Of course, if you like it the way it is, then you can just leave it like that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the drawing the way it is. But I do feel like, personally, I want to add a little extra something to it. So I just spend a little time filling in any little blank spaces with little circles. And now I'm coming to do that detailed next step. And what I like to do now is to use a slightly different pen. So I use a slightly different size nib, and in this case I'm using a larger one, actually a 0.8, which is the largest one of these that I have. And that's going to give a little bit of weight to the drawing. Sometimes I also use a very fine detail pen, so there's a 0.05 nib that I would use sometimes, and that will just allow me to create a range of different tones in the drawing, and it gives it some extra dimension, and it gives it a lot more interest. So I'm doing these little stippled marks around the outsides of each of the little circles with that pen with the slightly thicker nib. And I'm going all around the outside of each circle, but I'm making sure that I do a few more stipples and a few more marks at the bottom left hand side of the page, and that'll just make it look a little bit more like they're 3D and look a little bit like that side's in shadow. When you start putting the stippled marks on these things, they start to kind of come to life a little bit, and I'm starting to think about what they could be. Are they like something chemical, like from chemistry, or are they like the flower centres or bits of pollen? All sorts of things that they could be, and they suddenly start taking on form in my imagination. So I go through the process of stippling quite carefully and quite slowly. I know that the stippling is going to take me as long as the rest of the drawing did, but that's okay, because part of this process is about, well, at some point I stop thinking so much about what I'm doing, and it starts to kind of get into that flow state where you're really focused on it, but you're not having to think so much about it. It's a really relaxing state to be in, and it's something that I really enjoy about this. So overall, doing this whole drawing took me about maybe an hour. So obviously I've sped up some of the footage because you'd have to be really dedicated to want to sit here for an hour and watch me do this. I would be really interested to know if you try a drawing like this. If you want to reuse some of my patterns as a starting point, then feel free to do that. But I'd really like you to try and be creative and think about developing them, how they might develop and how they might change, and how you might make them look different to these ones. If you do have any pictures, put them on Instagram and tag me. I'd love to see them. And now the drawing's finished, I'm really quite pleased with how it's come out. I like the 3D effect of the stippling. And the last thing to do is simply to use an eraser to rub away the pencil marks that I made to start with. And then it's all done. So this is the drawing that I did today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scan this and I'm going to make a digital image out of it, and I'm going to upload it to Patreon for my Patreon subscribers to download if they'd like to. I do have a Patreon. I've got a couple of different levels that you can follow me at. Starts at $1 a month, and for that you get some kind of behind the scenes content, do little studio updates once a month. The higher level is if people follow me for a year, for 12 months consecutively at that level, then they get to choose any available print that I have in my shop, and I will send it to them. Yeah, I know original art isn't cheap, so that is a good way of making it affordable for people. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching that. I promised more art content for 2020, and this is the first of what I hope will be many. I will be doing some more pattern developing, so I'll show you what I do with some of these patterns and how they develop into prints. I quite fancy trying some new media in 2020, so you'll get to see me making mistakes and trying things for the first time and not really knowing how they work, and yeah, I want to be really honest and share those things with you too. There'll be some maker videos as well. I've got a few projects in mind. And I actually have ingredients for some, and there will be some like eco makes as well. So that's my plan for 2020. More art, more making, more videos. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye bye.